Thank you, Bob, for reading and leading us this morning. I begin by mentioning that passage in Philippians that was read. That is a nice passage for us to um, look into the ministry of Paul and draw out some really important analogies and uh, similarities, comparisons with our current context that are very real, related to the issue of our social relationships, about transforming our friendships, about building alliances in unlikely places, about creating partnerships that take courage and are new partnerships for us. This is all part of ministry in a trying time. These kinds of uh, new opportunities to build new kinds of relationships that we haven't had before or that we haven't exercised in quite the same way before. So that's what I'm talking about. And I want to get there first by giving a little bit of background here to Philippians, where Paul is writing to followers of Jesus who live in Philippi. And Paul is imprisoned somewhere in the Western Mediterranean. It could be in Rome, but it might not be in Rome. But he's writing from prison. And the people that he's writing to who live in Philippi are more than likely they're ethnically diverse. They may have they're certainly Greek speaking, and they may have a predominance of Jews and or Greeks. But in any case, it's not a homogenous monolithic group. It's a group that is living in a city that was torn apart by civil war, not a whole long time before this, caught up in the Roman Civil War. And at the end of that, Philippi, which was a Greek city or had been a Greek city for 300 years, was turned into a Roman colony. So this is important because it manifests itself in Paul's letter that he shows an awareness of writing to people who were living in a Roman colony and acknowledging that their relationships in Philippi are different than the kinds of relationships that people have to negotiate who are following Paul that live in Jerusalem or who live in Corinth or Thessalonica or other Greek cities. So in this case, Philippi, it's a Roman colony, but it's predominantly Greek culture. It's Greek language is the predominant language, even though it's a Roman colony. There would have been some Latin spoken. Paul's writing his letter in Greek to his audience. And in this letter, and in this particular chapter, chapter 4, that I'm going to be walking through, Paul is doing a couple of things, but the first thing he's trying to do is emphasize how dear and deep and emotional is his relationship with them in particular. And he says this in a number of ways, but I want to get to it by reading a couple of lines in the text. It's worth rereading. In the first 3 verses, Paul starts out and says, "My brothers and sisters, dear friends, my joy and my crown, stand in the Lord in this way, my dear friends." Again. And then he continues after this appeal for a couple of people to work out their differences. And he says, "You have all struggled together in the gospel ministry from the very beginning, along with me, Clement, and my other co-workers whose names are in the book of life. Rejoice in the Lord always. Again, I say, rejoice in the Lord." What a positive and rich beginning to his letter, where he is really committing to his high view of them from the very beginning. And I say that because he relies on this book of life quote. And I want to say something about that because we've heard that, the book of life, but doesn't it appear in other places in the Bible? Yes, it does. Not very many times. But it likely had a long and rich history to it, and legendary status to it. It seems that a kind of idea of a book of life where where the good people's names are in it and the bad people's names are not found there, goes back well before the New Testament, even before the Hebrew Bible, where we have one or two mentions of a book of life, and into the ancient Babylonian periods, where they had a thing called the Tablet of Destiny. So it was before books, and it was called the Tablet of Destiny, where the same type thing, where the righteous names appear in this tablet and the unrighteous or evil did not appear. And there's texts in the New Testament that talk about a book of life. There aren't many, about 5 or 6, but they're almost all negative. For instance, I'll take one from each section. Revelation 20. I saw the dead, the great and small, standing before the throne, and the books were opened. But only those whose names are written in the Lamb's book of life appear there. Daniel 7, another reference to books of life, if you will. A river of fire was flowing from out of the throne of God. Thousands upon thousands attended him. Tens of thousands stood before God, and the court was seated, and the books were opened. Very ominous kind of feeling. It's sort of like you're in or you're out. You're either in the book or you're not in the book. And the book of Revelation has multiple passages where there's people who are in the book and they get blotted out of the book. Psalm 69 says, charge them with a crime. Speaking of the psalmist's enemies, charge them with a crime, O God, and do not let them share in your salvation. May they be blotted out of the book of life. So there's a 1,000-year or more tradition of this kind of book of life that, by most of the instances I see, was kind of used as a judgmental, threatening kind of thing. Like, you want to make sure you're in the book of life, rather than it sort of being a rejoiceful kind of thing. Oh, I can't wait to open to page whatever it is and see my name in the book of life. It doesn't really talk about it like that. But Paul does here, and Paul is the only one who does it in this way, where Paul seems to know, where I've never seen anyone else express this kind of detailed knowledge about the book of life. Paul knows whose names are in it. And he even names when Clement's name is in there, your names are in there, my co-workers' names are in the book of life. Implied, my name is in the book of life, Paul. And what a reach, really, what a kind of almost an outrageous kind of claim. Who is he to say that? But he says it and repeats this kind of enthusiasm about his relationship with people, that he's saying, I deeply trust you. I know your heart. I know there's something going on here where Paul loves these people and he depends on their support. But there's also been obstacles and challenges to that reciprocal relationship from happening. And Paul thought they might be discouraged, that maybe they didn't rate, or Paul didn't understand their true commitment to the gospel ministry. So Paul writes this letter to say, no, I get it. I do understand. And you all are in the book of life, along with me and my colleagues. Moving on. Paul also says in Philippians chapter 4, verse 17, as he goes on, continues to say good things about them. In fact, he says, at the beginning of my gospel ministry, when I left Macedonia, which means to suggest he was probably heading further west toward Rome, consistent with where he's in prison. I left Macedonia, and no church shared with me in the matter of giving and receiving. Reciprocal, not just giving and receiving, except you alone. Wow, he raises them up that high. No one has participated in this ministry in terms of giving to me and receiving from me like you have. And I do not say this because I'm seeking a gift from you. Rather, I'm seeking the credit that abounds to your account when you give. Paul's just saying, I'm all about the reciprocal giving and receiving, and us continuing to like credit and debit each other's accounts with gifts of love and sacrifice than I am trying to keep track of how much you're giving to me or how much I'm giving to you. For Paul says in the next line, for I have received everything. I have plenty. I don't have any need. Especially since I received the gift that you gave to me previously. The brothers here with me send their greetings, and all the saints greet you as well, especially, remember my comment about them being in a Roman colony and dealing with the Roman political situation in that city. The brothers send you greetings, and especially those who belong to Caesar's household send you greetings. People in the highest political ranking status place who were becoming followers of Jesus made sure Paul sent word to those in a Roman colony in Philippi who were not Roman citizens that they were with them, they were supporting them. So what I'm hoping you're seeing here is a set of unlikely alliances and support. People from Caesar's house, that's a rare thing. Paul says it only one time ever that he sends greetings from Caesar's household, and he does it to those in a Roman colony. Controversial. We see it only one other time in the whole New Testament at all, where Luke says that those from Herod's household send greetings. So we were already seeing from an early stage and then all the way through that the success of the mission of Paul, the gospel ministry, was dependent upon building relationships and alliances and partnerships that did not yet exist. They had to be forged. And so that was what Paul was doing throughout his ministry, and his letters really reflect this. I'm not saying anything too profound here, but I just want to emphasize it because it is something that needs to be in the center of our interpretation of what Paul's about. Negotiating new partnerships. Keeping that in mind and moving to our celebration of LGBTQ pride, and also being in the midst of very earth-shattering, important, critical questions and challenges for us on racial equality, these two things come together in a similar kind of way today. For those of you who got a chance to read the midweek that was sent out Friday, I shared a poem from James Baldwin. James Baldwin was a prolific, one of the greatest writers of our time, of our era in the 20th century, from 1924 to 1987. He lived, and he was a gay black man. And he was living in a time when being gay was dangerous, as it can be today, but far more dangerous then, and dangerous to be black. And here he is both. And that would be dangerous for him among whites and among blacks in some respects. And James Baldwin flourished and thrived in the midst of great oppression and adversity because he had such a wide array of kinds of relationships that he forged and made part of his journey and his mission. In the same way, I want to say that I'm inspired to see the kinds of alliances that are being built and partnerships that are being strengthened in this day right now that we're in. I'm happy to see the LGBTQ community be so boisterous in their protest on behalf of Black Lives Matter. They're making that real. And I'm moved by Black, gay, and lesbians who are speaking out about the importance of Black Lives Matters for LGBTQ Black persons who have felt really wedged in between the Black community resistance and non-acceptance, and the white community's resistance and non-acceptance, so that both their race and their sexuality are disabilities, are treated as disabilities by everyone around them. But the LGBTQ community and Black Lives Matter are building alliance, and I'm here to tell you to watch that because it's going to go somewhere real. It existed before George Floyd's death anyway, but it's growing deeper roots now as racial equality is in many relationships and alliances. And this is happening because of shared experience. Shared experiences is what is the fertile ground of empathy. And when we share difficult experiences, we have the seeds of empathy that grow for people who have had those kind of difficult experiences with us. People who suffer through and survive COVID-19 are going to have a great deal of empathy with others who do the same, because it is so life-changing, and it is such a gripping experience that empathy comes out of it. The Black community in these days and in the days prior for so much time has been trying to explain to the white community that it feels like it's living under a constant death sentence, and that life doesn't even feel safe for children or adults who are Black, and that the signs reflect this when they carry them in the street about, we just want to live, or let us breathe. It's a sort of very basic kind of survival protest. The LGBT community understands this and empathizes with this, and all of us need to understand that empathy too. Because as we celebrate and honor the courageous lives of LGBTQ people, let us remember what has built their capacity for empathy. It's been suffering. And it's appropriate that we celebrate Pride in June and lift our joyous voice above calamity, because it has been in June that the gay community has suffered so much violence and loss, dating back 50 or 60 years. The LGBT community can share with us all too well about the New York City riots at Stonewall in 1969, where for days in June, in fact, on this very day, June 28, 1969, where police attacked for days and brutally carried out attacks on the gay lesbian community in Greenwich Village and other neighborhoods in New York City. This event led to widespread protests and resistance, and was a public display of trampling over bodies of gays and lesbian people publicly in a way that had been done privately for so long. 4 years later, in June again of 1973, was the event of the Upstairs Lounge arson attack in Louisiana, where some 30 people were burned to death in a gay nightclub that was intentionally set on fire to murder the people inside. And then not much later, we got into the 80s and we saw a complete resistance or inability for the straight community to hear the gay community pleading for help over the HIV/AIDS epidemic. And that we had to see literally thousands and thousands of gays and lesbian and straight people die of AIDS before our government then would even acknowledge the pain and the suffering because it was someone else's disease. Jumping way ahead just because of time to Orlando, Florida in June of 2016. The Pulse nightclub shooting, 100 people shot, 50 people killed, 50 people injured in the Orlando, Florida Pulse nightclub shooting. These are explosive public events that represent a million other atrocities over many, many decades to millions of individual lives that went unnoticed, except to the victims. That experience for the LGBT community gives them an instant empathy and understanding of the words Black Lives Matter. And even though there are Black people who are not accepting of LGBTQ individuals, just as there are white people, there are Black people who are building that alliance anyway. And there are LGBTQ people who are trusting and confident that that alliance is going to fly because there's so much empathy. And we see the history that teaches us this. This is the abolition movement in slavery was coupled with the women's suffrage movement in a similar kind of fashion. Unlikely alliances that become that very thing that overturns cultures of hate. And so, Shell Ridge, what I'm getting at here, I hope you're seeing pretty clearly that both in Paul's time and in our time today, it was then and is now the case that the kinds of things we're facing right now will only see triumph with new relationships. The book that we'll be reading, White Fragility, in more than one way emphasizes one main thing, among others, and that is we still live in a segregated society, which I mentioned last week. We still have mostly white and mostly Black in their own worlds. And that has to come to an end. And that onus is on white people. This is a call for us as a white suburban church to rise to this occasion and to build new relationships across racial, gender, and sexuality lines. I've been told, and I've read, I should say, that well over half of the churches in the United States have 75 or fewer members. That's us. Our smallness is not unique, nor is it an excuse. We have the freedom and the gift and the permission and the Spirit of God behind it to influence our culture, to influence our community for the better. To be part of that movement that will succeed because of its sheer massive participation, not because of 10 churches that have 10,000 members, but because of the thousands of churches that have 50 to 100 members. That's where the battle is won. And we have a call. And I hope that all of us are feeling it in a real way and that this is just not talk, but that we're really willing to learn more about ourselves and each other. We're not going to fix ourselves or each other anytime soon, that this is also a long haul, but with less patience, if we could, and that we are in the right position to do something. We're not in a against all odd position. We have momentum at our back in many ways. And this is the time, right now, in the midst of what we're dealing with, and in the month of June, when we celebrate Pride and the LGBT community remembers all too well why this month is so critical. Because those tragedies were so horrific. In closing, Shell Ridge Community Church, I point you to this verse in Paul, chapter 4 again, verse 10, where Paul says to the Philippians again, I have great joy in God because now, at last, you have again expressed your concern for me. At first, kind of sounds like, well, finally you're expressing, but he says, no, wait. I know that you've always been concerned. I know that you've always, more than anyone else, have been in this reciprocal relationship building across lines of differences with me more than anyone else has. I just know that you haven't had the opportunity yet to show it. That's what Paul says. I know you were concerned before, but you just didn't have opportunity to do anything about it. Implied, now you do. Shell Ridge Community Church, now we do too. The opportunity is before us. We have expressed all along. This is not new for us. It's just a higher expectation we're setting for us. We've been talking and debating and listening about race and sexuality for years. Before I came, you did. Let's go deeper. This is our path. This is our journey. And now is the time. And now is the opportunity. Amen.